Good morning, everybody. I love that misquote of Gillian Triggs. I thought that she was going to say the actual Muhammad Ali line of "sting like a bee," because whenever I'm in a room with the Older Women's Network, you buzz like bees. There's this kind of hum of productivity, and I feel that today you're going to be making a lot of honey. So it's really lovely to be here with you today. It is a very strange moment in our history, and it's an uncomfortable moment for many people, I think, waiting for the referendum. I feel like we're in a kind of limbo now in the last 2 weeks, and that is obviously much more uncomfortable for some people than for others. I think sometimes maybe that roar can be interpreted at different levels of volume, and I think we have to let go of the idea that roaring is even going to be heard by people who've decided to vote no, but that the undecideds are a really rich and fertile ground for the next 2 weeks. And don't assume that everybody that you come across in everyday life has made a decision, because they haven't. I find that it's really useful, for example, in the supermarket to talk to someone at the checkout and say, have you made a decision about this yet? And, just kind of go slow with packing your bag so that you've got a little bit more time to sort of get past the possible stunned reaction that you get from the checkout person. But try and engage with anybody that you think might not be sure yet. There are so many people that I come across who are not reading newspapers, who are exercising a kind of deliberate media blockout these days because they are so frightened by polarizing and shrill debate. So you have to find a safe way to have the conversation with people who are not necessarily watching the news the way all the hyper-aware women in this room are. And I really encourage you in the next 2 weeks to have a go. Anne, it's lovely to be here with you.
Thank you, likewise.
I feel very honoured to be in conversation with you. Now, I have to say that in order to try and personalise some of these introductions today, because you're going to get sick of the sight of me because I'm here all day with you, I sent an email out to everybody to say, if you're a speaker, could you tell me something that you do in your spare time so that, apart from the official bios that everybody's got on the handouts, I can say something about you. Well, of course, no one really bothered to reply, except in the most sort of cursory way. Anne did confess to me that she has a love of trashy TV, the trashier the better. But what I also discovered that she didn't say to me was on her LinkedIn page, she's posted 2 articles about chocolate. So I think we can safely say that you are a chocoholic.
I think that's true. It goes with a glass of red wine.
It does. They've both got antioxidants in them, so they're terribly good for us.
Very healthy.
Okay, let's get serious now. I think one of the things that we as a room would really all appreciate is hearing from you about what led you to investigate the issues that you've taken on, because I'm aware of the fact that as producers, you're always pitching. It's a very competitive world, the world of Four Corners. You have to commandeer a lot of resources and time in order to deliver the in-depth kind of exposés that you do. So what made you decide to focus on aged care, given that this is not, I have to say in journalistic terms, considered a sexy subject?
Well, I felt so strongly about what was happening in aged care that I'd always been a behind-the-scenes journalist. I was a newspaper journalist at The Australian, and then when I went to the ABC, I couldn't get a job as a reporter, so I became a researcher and then a producer. And I was working at Four Corners as a producer. I made a program. I followed 3 people with dementia over a year. And it was my first experience of being inside an aged care facility. And so that was a real surprise to me and a shock, even though, I was only allowed into one, and that was a good place. But I was struck by the number of people just sitting in front of a TV, people literally calling for help. The other place wouldn't allow me in, which obviously piqued my interest because I'm thinking, well, why not, if everything is so great? So that started me on a path of sort of just taking a bit more of an interest in anything I read about aged care. And I was a producer at that time, so I encouraged a colleague of mine who was a reporter to do a story about the complaints process in aged care, and she did, a great job. However, I just felt like something was missing, and I did take some time off from work for a period of time, and I was so I just really felt Australia did not know what was happening inside. And you couldn't escape it, because I'm sure everybody here knows, anecdotally, we all knew what was happening, because, my parents told me, my friends told me, everybody I spoke to. And also at the ABC, whenever we did a story on aged care, we were inundated with emails, which is a sure sign that something is up. So then that's when... And I've got to say another thing on a personal level, which is my mother-in-law had dementia, and I saw her treatment in an aged care facility, which was a top-notch, very expensive place, and it was not good. And so I literally decided to put myself out as a reporter, because I didn't think anybody else quite got it. And so I pitched it to the investigations unit as a crowdsourced investigation, and we received 4,000 emails within about a week, which told you everything about the fact that there was a desperate need for help, and neither side of politics was listening to people.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, 9 times out of 10, I have to say, when someone decides that they're going to campaign on this issue, it is because they have had personal experience of going into aged care and thinking, I do not want this for my family or for me. So it is the conduit, isn't it? Often is the sort of personal route.
Absolutely. And I mean, and we saw it as a family as well, because I saw my mother-in-law restrained chemically. She didn't need to be. I saw that the staff that were looking after her didn't have any training in dementia, that this was an empty room that all of these very distressed people were in. I saw us as a family trying to complain to management and being dismissed in a way that I found so disconcerting. And those were the stories that were coming to us. So this wasn't just us, this was everybody. And as you say, it's not a sexy subject. This is why it never received attention. I'll just say one other thing, actually, just having listened to Gillian Triggs there, about the role of everyone, older women and women in general. My stories come from people like all of you. They don't come really from advocacy groups or lobby groups or anything like that. They are seem to be involved in a much high level area. They don't know the experience on the ground. Everything that I have reported on comes from people through Facebook or just emailing me. So the scope for everyone to tell their story is absolutely there, because they're the stories that actually, if you want to capture an issue, you have to do it on a personal level. And you can talk a lot about policy and what's wrong, but actually it's about a personal experience that engages an audience that says, my God, how could that possibly happen in Australia? So I'd encourage everyone, you can, if you have an important story to tell, or you've got a whistle to blow, because those people are important too, it's worth doing.
Yeah, you've got to be pretty brave to be a whistleblower in this country at the moment. There's a bit of an issue around legislation there, but I absolutely take your point. And of course, you mentioned those 4,000 emails that you got in a matter of a week. So can you just explain how, when you say some of these programs that you've worked on, and we're going to talk about a couple of them, have been crowdsourced, how do you wade through the material that's coming at you in that great wave of evidence and testimony and hearsay and reporting? How do you work out which stories to follow, which stories are going to deliver something that you can show us on the screen? Because that's also part of the challenge, is this is not print. You have to be able to show us.
It's so true. And it was just myself and another journalist who did wade through them all. I did know, having worked in the media for a long period of time, that people had heard about all of the problems in aged care for such a long time and nothing had happened. And I knew we had to show people. And so when we asked for people to reply to us and send emails, we asked, do you have photographic or video evidence? And because I kept thinking about the four corners, live exports, greyhound racing. These are the things that galvanised the country. which I've got to add surprises me about the fact that the last Four Corners that I just did on Monday night just seems to have disappeared to a certain extent. I think that says something about our society and how we regard people with a disability. The fact that shocking vision didn't get reported by other media, the opposition hasn't commented on it, that it seems to be disappearing. Having said that, always you think that there's no public reaction, but you just hope somewhere down there is effect, there is a reaction. But yeah, so going back to that first crowdsourced investigation, it really did come down to what do you have, how can I tell this story, how's it going to have an effect, how will people feel about it? And so I think when you do stories like these, you tend to somehow put a little bit of yourself into it, because obviously you have to choose the stories, you have to choose what they're saying, how to structure it, etc. And so I think it's a weird thing. I do think that something of your personality, I think it must be for all journalists, comes through. And so because I always think about my audience rather than about what I'm doing, I just think about how's that going to have an impact. And so that's how I choose what I report on.
Is there ever anything that you think is too sensitive to show us? Because I know obviously programs come with warnings, and some of the footage that we've seen in Four Corners over the years has been truly, truly traumatising. And of course it is true that once you see it, you can't unsee it. So I want to know how you process that personally, professionally yourself, how you deal with that avalanche of material, but also how you make a decision that something is just too much.
Well, to the first one, in general, if it's very much we discuss it amongst ourselves because we're a team, and I have an executive producer, and we gauge it that way. I've got to say, in aged care, this is such an awful thing to say, but the terrible pictures of pressure wounds that people have had are just awful. It doesn't serve any purpose to show them, and they're really distressing. In terms of the material that I've received and the decision to run it on air, sometimes if we feel something is too much, we'll blur that, or we'll cut out at a certain time. In regards to the impact on myself and colleagues, fortunately or unfortunately, you become a little bit immune to some things. Having said that, there was one particular video that I just could not even look at any longer or listen to, because it was just so distressing of the abuse of an older woman in an aged care home in her room by a worker. That was just so shocking that, I had to stop. I had to stop hearing it and looking at it.
And what happened in that particular case afterwards? I mean, don't describe that moment, but what happened?
Oh, well, those were the programs that led to the Royal Commission. So, having said that, Scott Morrison announced the Royal Commission the day before we went to air. He was such a clever marketer that he knew what to do. He'd only been in the job 5 weeks. And he knew that there was already a discussion around about what this two-part Four Corners was going to be. They had a good sense of it because we'd had to send off questions to the Quality and Safety Commission to get answers. We'd interviewed the then Minister, Ken Wyatt. They knew, by that weekend, they knew what we had, and he announced it on the Sunday. And that didn't bother me. I was just absolutely thrilled to bits that there was a Royal Commission. It was the best prize I've ever won, if you like. It was just amazing, and no matter what you might think about what emerged from that and whether things have improved or not, that's another question, I guess.
Well, I do want to ask you about that, but before I get to that, I wanted to ask you, okay, so you got preempted somewhat there by ScoMo, but what about the media and the response generally to that program? Were you surprised by the reaction?
Well, this is the clever thing about politicians. What they do, I mean, he got ahead of it. It was smart politics. He just made it his own. In fact, in the last election campaign, he actually during the debate, live debate, he said he blew the whistle on aged care. You know, you have to hand it to him.
One of those portfolios he'd appointed himself to secretly.
Yeah, maybe years earlier.
Yeah.
So I suppose what happened was, yes, as you say, it did take the wind out of the sails a little, but in general, people, I think, were just so shocked by what they saw, I suppose what they'd heard and they'd seen personally. The thing about that was the industry had been telling everybody for decades, there's a few bad apples here. It's not widespread. And I think even now they still do that. I also thought that, and this is going back to my issue about everybody, you know, having a voice, being able to actually reach the media. The advocacy services did nothing for us, did not help, did not give us cases, there's so many different forces in play. And when you're talking about services that are funded by the government, that are called stakeholders, that don't necessarily represent the real people, that's when you realise how important it is to hear from the public.
And also the big divisions between the not-for-profit sector and the sort of, the commercially very successful part of the sector.
Well, yes, but having said that, there were plenty of examples of the not-for-profits just not putting on the right staff, not attending to problems and complaints.
So how do you feel about, having uncovered all of this, how did you feel about the Aged Care Royal Commission when it actually happened? Did you feel that in a sense it missed an opportunity to come down with more robust recommendations? What would you like to have seen?
Well, I think obviously there was a problem because you had two commissioners who disagreed on a number of issues, and Cathy Eager will tell you all about that. That was a problem, so it split the conclusions. But putting all of that aside, I think, okay, some great things were recommended. Okay, so, the number of minutes per resident, training for staff, a database where people could compare the aged care facilities. But when they sound great on paper, let me tell you, that's not happening, okay? The minutes per person, okay, the government is just taking the word of a provider on that. Are they looking at rosters? Are they actually able to ascertain? That's a big job for the regulator. The training of all staff has not happened. That's just sunk. Nobody's even talking about that, I don't think. And this website where we're able to compare, I've looked at that website. You can't compare them side by side. You can't look at, here's my area. I want to find a place for my parent or grandparent or sibling. You can't do it. The number of stars that they give a facility doesn't correlate. Everybody seems to have passed quite well. It's not anything like the US star rating system. So there's plenty where I think that the public is really still in the dark. And let's be honest, when you're going to put someone into aged care, you're in crisis mode. It's very difficult to try and navigate it. It's a whole system which is foreign to you, and you're making a decision at a critical point. So I am disappointed. Look, the only thing that I will say is, and I don't know whether I can gauge it from this, but I do not receive the same number of emails that I used to receive about aged care. So that's just from a personal point of view, and I do hear good things. I am concerned about things like there's a serious incident response scheme which still is getting these unbelievable numbers of neglect, abuse, sexual assault, etc., that is buried in a report that the rest of the media doesn't seem interested in. I find that astounding.
So how do we keep applying the pressure once the Aged Care Royal Commission has kind of had its moment in the media and in the news cycle? How do we keep applying the pressure on the issues that you say are not being properly addressed?
Well, it's really difficult. It's difficult for me to do it. I need, I need those stories to come to me. That's the only way of doing it. And unfortunately, I always think of Four Corners as the trailblazer in terms of actually highlighting an issue. But as you can see, even with this particular last story I did, it can sink without a trace because, there's other forces in play. There's other media that don't like to publicise another media organisation's stories. There's people who think that's not an issue for us. There's politicians who look and say it's not getting any traction anywhere else. I can afford to forget this. All I would say is it's just about making contact with those personal stories and information that can make a way to get through.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because one of the frustrations, of course, of working on a program like Four Corners is you don't get two bites at the cherry. Once you've done aged care, you're not going to be able to revisit that subject for a particular period of time because you're in a kind of queue with all the other producers who've also got urgent stories. So I really appreciate the fact that you clearly care and are staying on top of this subject. Other subjects that you've tackled that I wanted to ask you about. You recently worked on a story on the public trustee system and its failures. And I wondered, again, this is a very, to most people, under the radar subject. And again, quite an unsexy subject. So how did you go about exposing the failures of the public trustee system? And how did you get people to speak to you about that, given that puts them in a legal jeopardy, doesn't it?
Yeah, that was a difficult one as well. So I found out about the public guardian and public trustee systems as part of the aged care stories that I was doing. So people would contact me and say, well, I can't actually speak to you on that because my mother is under the public guardian or the public trustee. So I kept an eye on that. There was, once again, little grassroots advocacy groups. I can't underestimate the impact that these people have because these are people who have they have an understanding of the entire system. So when you can go to a journalist and say, here's the facts and figures and here's the latest reports and here's people that can talk to you, that it becomes easier for a journalist. Having said that, obviously that you have these issues about reporting. And I knew, so for those who don't know, anybody who's under the public guardian or public trustee, unless you're in the ACT, you can't be identified. So the legislation is like that because they feel that these people need protecting, that there must be some sort of shame attached to being under the public guardian or the public trustee. It says you can't look after yourself, you can't look after your finances. So the reason that's why the legislation is in place. I knew that if we had to do that story, we had to name and show people, which is why our lawyers went to the Supreme Courts on a number of cases. And this is, once again, I keep harking back to this, but this is a case of, I'm in this fortunate position now where people do write to me because they know I cover these particular issues. So one woman in particular contacted me about a man that she'd met. She was a psychologist. I knew that was a story that had to be told. I knew he had a lot of money. I knew that she had the documents that showed me how he was sort of being fleeced. I then researched, I just go through everything. I just search the internet. I go through websites. I look at past reports to find stories that I think will resonate with the public. And so once I found those and I knew that it would make a Four Corners, I can go to Four Corners and say, this is an issue, but we need to go to the Supreme Court. So there was a whole legal issue associated with that, which is really time-consuming and difficult and...
Expensive.
Expensive, yes. But I felt as if we would have a good chance of success, and we did. And it's amazing how apparently a colleague of mine at Four Corners said recently every time they go to interview someone, they all start talking about the public guardian and the public trustee because lots of people have issues with it. The stories I covered, I never covered the family issues because that's very complicated. You can never quite know what the situation is, but that is, people may know, the more common issue. It's family splits, it's estranged siblings and children, daughters and so forth, where conflicts come into play. Somebody goes to the civil and administrative tribunal to get mum or dad under the public guardian, and that's where it sort of all unravels, and then they're stuck. They can't speak. And then for myself as a journalist, it's really difficult because then you are hearing from two different sides of a story, one alleging abuse of a family member, physical or financial, and once again it's a case of I need to see the evidence. How can you prove this to me? How do I know who I'm backing is the right one? So I have steered clear of those because they're difficult, and also if you name that person, if you go to court and mount a legal challenge, that person, the other sibling, is most likely going to challenge that as well. So there's always obstacles, but I think I'm really interested to see what happens with the Royal Commission findings, recommendations, which are coming down tomorrow, right? And I'm really hopeful that there's going to be a recommendation to lift all of those gag orders, and then the rest of the media can just report on this. It doesn't have to be just the ABC going and making legal challenges. It's everybody can, because it's just a little bit of sunlight on this issue that will make a difference. Yeah.
Well, but you've paved the way, so thank you, Anne, for that. In all the work that you've done around these issues to do with aged care, to do with the public guardianship process, what have you been able to observe that's relevant to older women in particular? Are older women more vulnerable in the public trustee system than men, for example? Obviously, we think that there is more abuse of women in aged care than there is of men. If only there are more women in aged care because women live longer. So what have you observed about older women in across the board of the programs that you've made?
Well, the first thing I would say is that in every single one of the stories that I've done, it is always a woman who has come to me. It is the women who we are the carers. We're the carers of our children, we're the carers of our parents, the carers of our siblings, the carers of our friends. It's such an under-recognised role that we all play. And I'm telling you, it is those women who fight and to get the story out, who come to me, who are incredible. The last one I did, all the mothers that are dealing with children with disabilities are incredible women. So in the first instance, I've got to applaud all of these amazing women who do that work. And I know everybody here in the room does that sort of work. It's under-recognised. In terms of the fact that women are more impacted in aged care, I think you're right, simply because, yes, perhaps there definitely are more women in aged care. I think also there's a situation which we've all grown up in, which is we don't complain, we put up with it, we don't like to create a fuss, we think of others. So I hear of all these incredible women who are residents in aged care saying to aged care workers, look, go and attend to someone else, don't worry, I'll be fine. I mean, that's the selfless nature of our sex, unfortunately. So I think that often that's the case. I think when it comes to the public trustee system, this is a terrible thing to say, but sometimes it's the sons who it can be their daughters as well, but somebody with an eye on the inheritance can influence mum more easily. And, the other thing is that women are more, I didn't realise this until recently, but women are more susceptible to dementia. So we become vulnerable in that sense as well. And so if you're in an aged care facility and you have dementia, being able to protect yourself, you have no hope. The thing that terrifies me absolutely and doesn't get attention is the sexual assault of women in aged care. When the Royal Commission recommendations came down, I was just appalled that the next day it did not receive the media attention that it should have, because Christian Porter was the story at that time. So it didn't get any attention, and I made the point on Twitter when I was on Twitter. Does it not? Okay, we're talking about the sexual assault of one woman here. What about the hundreds or thousands of older women in aged care who've been sexually assaulted? I was absolutely appalled. And what's even more surprising, towards the end of that Royal Commission, one of the facts that came out that all the media jumped on, it was like 50 women a week sexually assaulted in aged care. Yeah. And that was the big headline, and they forgot all of the other issues. It was a strange thing that the Royal Commission didn't cover sexual assault but just decided to throw that in at the end. Those figures are increasing all the time, and they're buried in a report that comes out quarterly. Doesn't get any attention. So once again, I mean, it's just sometimes, yes, we're invisible. I agree with that, and I think that everybody, you know, as we age, we recognise it more and more, and I feel it too. So
what's to be done on that particular issue, which, as you say, has been buried? And I have to commend Yumi at the Older Women's Network, who is a fierce champion of this issue on Twitter. She has been absolutely relentless about this. It is a really shocking and totally unacceptable figure. So what do we have to do?
Well, I think it needs publicising in a much bigger way. I've tried to get to the bottom of it with the regulator, trying to find out where is it staff, is it residents? It is obviously, it's about understaffing. It is about the lack of training. It's about these massive facilities rather than the small ones that would do so much better, or the evidence shows us that. I wonder whether men and women in the same rooms and areas is a good idea. Apparently elsewhere, and Kathy Eager might know this, they're separated. Once again, the only way I can do anything is I try to publicise it. So I need to hear the stories in order to put them out there and put a face to the problem and then try to expose it. That's the only thing that I can do. In terms of what everybody on a just a general public level, I guess it's about, being in there, protecting people. I don't know, to be honest.
I'm going to go off script for a moment. There's a very contentious issue about video cameras in aged care, in individual rooms as opposed to in public spaces. What's your position on that?
Oh, I haven't thought about that for a long time, actually. I know that there was in South Australia, there was a trial of it. I don't know whether it was in their rooms or not. I think that if the family agrees, I know that the complaint from the facilities and the providers is it's a privacy issue and you shouldn't be allowed and so forth. Yeah. I think that I know that there are, and I have dealt with different people who have pushed for it themselves, who have said, I want not necessarily a video camera, but they have some software where they can plug in at any time to see how mum or dad is going. It's in their room and it's not being recorded, so that kind of takes away from the privacy issue, I believe. And they can talk to their family member or their friend, and they can hear from them. So that some people had that during COVID, which was great. I think it would put people on their toes in a much better way. It's amazing that issue particularly just died. But, I mean, obviously what you would much prefer is to have the right ratios, the right numbers of people, the correct trained staff. I mean, I'll just say one thing, having done this disability story recently, the difference in the pay salaries for people working in disability compared to working in aged care, it's like threefold. It's hugely different. So that's another thing. It does make you think, as you get older, you become less and less relevant and you become useless. And I do think it is such a shame that we are not recognising, in particular older women, because they're around for longer, the wisdom and the advice and the knowledge that we have isn't taken into account and respected in a way that it should be.
Well, we're here to fix that. It's come to the point in the morning where we've got 5 minutes for questions. So if you've got a question for Anne, come up to a microphone. Yes, come up to a microphone. No, don't come up to a microphone. No, we're not taking questions? Is that what you're saying to me? Okay. I'm running behind. Okay, that's my fault then. Okay, we're going to take one question. We have to take one question. As long as it's a quick one. You have to make it a quick one.
Thank you. I've worked in aged care and mental health and addiction places for many years. And what concerned me a lot this year was the poor old lady in the nursing home, aged care facility, I should say, who was tasered by that big burly policeman. And that he, so far, he's been laid off with full pay and, the things that go on. And these staff weren't really trained enough to cope with that lady with dementia in a more kindly way.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. That was absolutely a shocking case. And, I don't even know where that is at. In fact, thank you for reminding me. That's something I will chase.
Thank you, Anne, for being the crusader that you are. You will always be welcome here. And I think we now know who to direct all our stories to. Will you please join me in thanking Anne Connolly?